and welcome to Sustainable Prepping, your home for fear-free emergency preparedness for normal people. My name is Brecky, and today we are going to be talking about 10 things that I learned from 2020. If you are new here, welcome. I'm so glad you found this little slice of the internet. If you are not new, welcome back. Happy 2021. How are you? How are things? Don't forget to like this video, give it a nice big thumbs up, and subscribe to this channel, hitting the little bell so you are notified for every single video that I bring you on emergency preparedness for normal people. So these are not necessarily in any order. I haven't ranked them, but these are 10 things that I learned. And the first is that global emergencies aren't just possible, but they're likely. The pandemic really has shown me that globalized emergencies are something that we should absolutely have in our planning for the future. This was something that I kind of knew was likely just based on the amount of global travel that's available, but for the most part, we've been able to kind of control the global spread of other illnesses. I think about H1N1 and how that was spreading, but they were able to contain it with these pandemic readiness crews and teams that Obama had set up. And then when they were disbanded under the Trump administration, we had the spread of something so quickly, completely around the globe. No place was untouched. Even island nations weren't able to completely quelch the spread. And so going forward, I think that we're going to have to always have a plan for a global pandemic or other problem plan. We're just going to have to incorporate that into all of our emergency preparedness plans. The second lesson that I learned is that governments don't act fast enough. Now, there are some governments that were able to be quite nimble and act quickly. I think of New Zealand as one of the shining examples. For the most part, governments are big and they just weren't able to act fast enough to really cut this at the core. The American government's response was slow. By mid-January, I knew it was coming to the United States. In fact, by the end of February, I had been posting on my Facebook to warn my friends to go ahead and start getting prepared because something was going to happen. And by mid-March, we were in lockdown. There are important checks and balances in place, but that means that the government cannot act quickly, particularly with the level of bipartisanism that is happening in the United States. What does that mean on the ground level? Well, that means that you need to plan. The government isn't going to have a quick response. And so once you realize that there is a crisis happening or a crisis hits your community, whether it is a globalized crisis like another pandemic, or it's a localized crisis like a storm, a flood, fires, you should intend or expect that the government will be several days to weeks delayed in a unified response. So keep that in mind. The government's not going to always be there. And I'm not saying that as someone who hates the government, but one of the lessons I learned is that the government just can't respond as quickly as you can respond for yourself and your local community. The third lesson I learned is that toilet paper is king. Now, this is kind of a joke, right? Like everybody's hoarding toilet paper and it became a funny part of 2020. But in actuality, that is a true thing. If you run out of toilet paper, you are literally up a creek without a paddle, as they say. Now, in the United States, we manufacture our own toilet paper, but in other countries like Singapore and Hong Kong, they import it from the US. And if you run out, you run out, and you have to wait for those imports to make it to wherever you are. And so all the toilet paper is kind of a joke. It sort of symbolizes those essentials that we definitely don't want to run out of. And so I've learned, one of the lessons I have taken away is that even outside of my intended emergency preparedness, I should always have a backup for my daily in and out essentials like toilet paper and milk and bottles and diapers. Because I'm a mom. My fourth lesson is that having a 1-month emergency food supply should be an essential for every American that can afford it. It is not an above and beyond emergency preparedness thing. It should just be an essential part of your daily life. Just like you always have, I don't know, some batteries and a flashlight, or you have clothes, or you have laundry detergent, you should have a month's supply of food. Because with this kind of globalized pandemic and the fact that we know that globalized crises are definitely going to happen in the future, you definitely need that 1-month supply. It's no longer part of the realm of preppers with their beans and bullets and band-aids. It's now something that I think every single American that can afford to do so should absolutely have, no questions asked. 2 weeks of water, 1 month of food, and it should just be part of our normal lives. In fact, I feel like we should be giving people emergency preparedness supplies when they move into a new house, or when they have a baby, or when they get married. We should just make this a part of our normal culture. If you're curious about how you can do that, I do run a course, and the course isn't currently open as of the filming of this video, but we are going to be launching it again in the next few weeks, so keep your eyes out. Now, I want to have a quick caveat to say there's a lot of preppers that will say 1-month food supply isn't enough, and you're right. I think that a 1-month food supply isn't really enough. That's why I'm saying it's a basic essential and not actually like goals. Like that should be something that you knock out right away and you consider the same as having, you know, a box of cereal on your shelf for your kids. In my opinion, I think the average American should be striving for 3 to 6 months of food storage across their 3-tier system. But I think that that is sort of stretch goals for most people. I think that their essentials needs to be a 1-month dedicated emergency food supply that is unrelated to their pantry, right? Unrelated to what they have already on their shelves, dedicated 1-month food supply. The number 5 lesson that I learned is that we all need a rainy day fund. Now, I know that this seems like common sense that we should all have an emergency fund of some kind, but most Americans actually don't have one. We mostly live paycheck to paycheck, and that is so dangerous. And 2020 taught me just how important having a robust emergency fund is. Now, if you are someone who's just getting started with an emergency fund, my basic recommendation is that you start with $1,000 for a family. So anybody, no matter how many members in your family, should have a minimum of $1,000 plus $500 for every additional person in your family. So if you have a family of 4, you'd have $1,000 plus $500 per person, which would be $2,000 in total, which is in total of $3,000 as your minimum emergency fund. Going from there, if you have that minimum and you want to continue to save for a more robust and helpful emergency fund, I suggest that you start a goal of saving up to 3 to 6 months of your family's expenses. So whatever you spend that is a necessity for a month, so we're talking about groceries, rent, insurance, utilities, gas, and you try to save that much for starting at 3 months and then building it up to 6 months, and some people even are going for a year. So having a rainy day fund is no longer something that you should, you know, maybe think about doing. I feel like it's an essential. In fact, I think that it is so essential that you should even be doing that before you finish paying off all your debt. Grocery stores don't care if you don't have any money, right? Like your debt collectors might work with you and put you on a payment plan or something, but you want to be able to pay your rent and have money for food. So that's important. The 6th lesson I learned is that we should prepare for future lockdowns. Now, because of a pandemic, right, this goes back to the first lesson of a globalized crisis is very likely going to happen. So it could be a pandemic, but it also could be martial law, it could be rioting, it could be major weather events. I mean, who knows what's coming down the pike, but at the end of the day, I think we should all mentally start preparing for more lockdowns. Now, because we should be thinking not just about ourselves, about our communities, because strong communities mean you're going to have more of a chance of thriving and surviving in a crisis than if you have a weak community. We should be thinking about the ways in which lockdowns exacerbate domestic violence and people who don't have enough already. So what I think that we need to do as a society is to consider what it means for lockdown situations and scenarios for those who need to escape domestic violence and unsafe situations, for those who are already on the margins who don't have enough on a regular day-to-day basis. And how can we strengthen our local communities? So where you live locally, how can you strengthen the resources in that area to support those who are already on the margins now before we go into another lockdown? How can you be proactively working on those issues so that your society is more supported and people who are already struggling don't further sink into the struggle? My number 7 lesson is that everyone should know how to cook. It's an essential skill. So cooking and eating at home is an essential skill, and we should all know how to cook more than just microwavable meals or pasta, right? I think most people can boil water for spaghetti, but most of us don't know how to make nourishing, healthful meals, particularly from pantry basics. Be able to make a variety of things with 1 or 2 essential ingredients. So it could be, you know, several different beans and rice varieties, or several different rice-based dishes like a curry and a stir fry and a beans and rice and a burrito bowl and all those sorts of things. Having those skills in place and practicing them on a regular basis means that not if, but when we are in a lockdown situation, when you're having to rely on your pantry, you're going to make those staples go so much farther. And I think we really need to stress for future kids the skill of home cooking, right? Not relying on your frozen microwavable stuff, but real home cooking needs to be considered an essential adult life skill. Faux show. Number 8 is that we are absolutely dependent on the internet. This is even more so as more and more of us are working from home and relying on the internet to make it viable for us to not have to show up to an office to work. And y'all, we are absolutely dependent on the internet. Now, this is not necessarily a good or a bad thing. For example, I need the internet to teach you guys about emergency preparedness. I couldn't do this without the internet. This would be nearly impossible to do if I was doing like mail out, you know, DVDs or something. We need the internet. I think that having a couple of ideas in place for info and entertainment that are not internet based in the event that it goes down. Now, I don't think we're going to have a long-term grid down situation in which the internet and electricity go away long-term. I just don't foresee that actually being something that happens, but we could have some minor interruptions to electrical or internet grids. Having a plan in place if you are without internet for a few days to be able to stay productive for your job and communicate with coworkers and to communicate with family, as well as to entertain yourself and your kids. What are you gonna do if the internet goes away? Because we're totally dependent on it. I'm not 100% sure, but it's something to start thinking and planning for. All right, number 9 is one we all know. Teachers and nurses and basically all essential workers are just not paid enough. It is so true, especially in my state in West Virginia. Teachers and nurses are not paid enough at all, and most of our essential frontline workers, I think about janitors and grocery store workers and sanitation workers, these folks are among our lowest paid in society. Teachers are among the lowest paid professionals in our society, and yes, teachers are professionals. A BA in teaching is a professional degree, but we don't value teachers. We need to be thinking about what it means for our essential workers, our frontline workers, to be people who are chronically underpaid, and what that's going to mean for society long term. Now, what you choose to do about it is going to depend upon your politics and your value system and your beliefs around taxation and all that kind of stuff, but it's important that you are vocal locally about addressing these issues. If we have a mass exodus from teaching and there aren't enough teachers who can keep our public school doors open, what are we going to do? Not everybody can homeschool. I certainly couldn't. I'd have to give up my job to homeschool long term, with 4 kids. So what does that mean for us? How do we support those people who are on the front lines who are not making enough money and make sure that they are cared for so that when the next situation happens, we're not seeing mass exoduses from those careers and that are creating cyclical problems down the road. Number 10 is an insight that is going to be controversial in the prepping community, and I don't really care because I'm here for controversy, and that is that most of our gear was useless. I have quite a bit of gear, not as much as a lot of people because I don't own weapons, I don't own guns, that's just a personal preference, but I do have some specialized prepping gear, usually around solar chargers and water filtration and things like that, and most of it was useless. I didn't need any of it. Most of our gear didn't help me at all. The basics are what saved us, right? The very basics, the things that everybody buys when they first get into prepping, or everybody should be buying when they first get into prepping, that is what saved our butts. The water storage, the food storage, the first aid, the robust first aid kits and systems, those are the things that really held us through. I think it just proves the point, and it's the point that I've been saying here and in other places, which is most of our gear is great once you have your basics, but it is an addition. It's a bonus. It's not essential. If you just had water and food and first aid, you would have been so far ahead of the average American during this pandemic. So 2020 really showed me that gear is nice, but it certainly isn't essential. Keep to the basics, have really solid basics, and then you can think about gear. And it wouldn't be a sustainable prepping video if I didn't give you at least one bonus. And one of the bonus takeaways that I had was that most of us just aren't ready. Even in the prepping community, there are a lot of us that were kind of caught off guard as to what we exactly needed. Most of us haven't had to test our preps out. And so it was really interesting, even for me, to see what I didn't have enough of. For example, I didn't have as much toilet paper as I thought I did. So it made me consider, okay, what is a reasonable amount that I want to keep at home in the event that we have another long-term lockdown scenario. I didn't have a robust plan in place for an internet outage, even though I rely on it. And so it's made me think about better ways to have backups for my backups that aren't internet based. Now that I have little kids, making sure all the plethora of things that little kids can get into, I have ways of helping to take care of them at home as much as possible to prevent them being exposed to the coronavirus or other future incidences if it's unsafe to go to a medical center. Even preppers weren't ready. Even people who've been in the emergency preparedness community for a long time, they saw that there were holes and gaps in their own plans. The average American was caught completely off guard. The number of people that I know that had no idea a massive lockdown was coming is astounding, and it doesn't bode well for future pandemics. My hope is that we've all learned from 2020, that we've learned what we don't have, we've learned where our growing curves are, and we've learned enough that we are ready to make plans and take action. For the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about ways to be proactive and to take a proactive mindset rather than a reactive mindset. A lot of people were reactive in 2020 because they didn't know anything about emergency preparedness, but now we know that it's important. And so I hope that you join me here in Sustainable Prep as we consider ways to be proactive in our emergency preparations, as well as we consider ways to have sustainable emergency preparedness, as well as sustainable lifestyles that lend themselves to emergency preparedness so that we can be calm and confident in any crisis. Comment down below and let me know one of the things that you learned from 2020. I want to know a lesson that you are taking away and that you would like to share here. You can also join us over on our Facebook group of Sustainable Prepping Insiders. I will totally link everything down below so you can come and find us. And as always, my friends, I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I will see you next week with goals for 2021.